Overlord Volume 4 Chapter 3. Chapter 3, Army of Death. Part 1. Oh, I can see it. Zenberu, seated near the back of Ro, laughed as he looked forward. A few hundred meters AEAD, they could see the first tribe marked for extinction, the village of the razor-tailed tribe. While it was about the same size as the Green Claw village, there were more lizard men here, probably because the lizard men from other tribes had steadily flocked to it. Now that they were preparing for war, everyone was very busy. It's hard to hold myself back with the mood in the air. There was an audible intake of air from Zenberu's nose as he inhaled the ambient scent. It was an odor that boiled one's blood. However, Crush had never smelled it before, and she said something different from the other two. Is it safe to ride over with Ro? Having sensed the tense atmosphere from a distance, Crush the plant monster was starting to feel nervous, and she said as much. She was worried that the battle-ready lizard men would rush Ro if he got close. They might know Zayusu, but not Crush or Zenberu, and it was not as though everyone in the razor-tailed tribe knew Zayusu either. No, it's the opposite. We're safer mounted on Ro. A puzzled look appeared on Crush's face, obscured by leaves as it was. Sensing her confusion, Zayusu elaborated. My brother should have come by earlier, and he should have told him that I'd be riding Ro. Therefore, news about us on Rosback should have reached him by now, so all we have to do is advance slowly. In fact, as Ro was splashing through the marsh, a black lizardman emerged from the village. Zayusu waved to the familiar figure. And that would be my brother. I see. Oh. The two of them spoke as one. Crush was genuinely curious, while Zenberu was like a beast that had sighted a powerful entity. As Ro moved forward, the distance between the two of them, between Zayusu and Shasuryu, grew shorter. Soon, they were close enough to see each other's faces, and the brothers looked at each other. They had only been apart for 2 days. However, they had prepared themselves for the eventuality that they would never see each other again, so their reunion was particularly touching. I'm glad you're back, Zayusu. And I have good news, Shasuryu. Shasuryu's gaze fell on the two people seated behind Zayusu. Zayusu felt Crush's arms tighten somewhat around his waist, due to her tension. Once they were in front of Shasuryu, Ro stopped in front of the familiar face and nosed at him with its foreheads. Sorry, I didn't bring any food with me. In the instant Ro heard those words, its heads immediately recoiled from Shasuryu, like a child throwing a tantrum. The Hydra might not be able to understand lizard men, but it must have telepathically sensed his thoughts. Either that, or it did not smell any food on him. Let's get off then. After waving to the other two, he lightly hopped off Ro's back, and then took Crush's hand as she jumped down. Shasuryu looked at Crush with a look of puzzlement on his face. And what's that plant monster? The fact that everyone reacted the same way left Crush a little demoralized, but she had no desire to contest it. That was probably due to Zenberu's constant needling of her. But the words which followed were a bombshell that made Crush stiffen up. She's the female that I love. Oh, Shasuryu murmured in awe. Then, he turned his attention to the still frozen Crush, who was holding his little brother's hand. Moo. One thing, is the person inside beautiful? And we're considering Ma. The sudden pain in his hand shut Zayusu up, because the person holding it had jabbed her claws into Zayusu's hand, and very forcefully too. Shasuryu looked at him with some displeasure. I see. To think someone like you who went on and on about appearances and said, what was it, you know I can't get married. You were just trying to act cool. You just didn't have anyone to fall in love with. Anyway, back to business. I am Shasuryu Shasha, chief of the Green Claw tribe. Thank you both for joining us. The way Chasuyu spoke did not seek out confirmation of their alliance but radiated the certainty that they would help. However, Crush and Zenbero were not the sort to be rattled by small things like that. We should be the ones thanking you. I am the acting chief of the Red Eye tribe, Crush Lu. Everyone expected Zenbero to introduce himself after Crush was done greeting Chasuyu, but they did not hear anything of the sort. Instead, Zenbero eyed Chasuyu from head to toe. After he was satisfied with what he had seen, he nodded and spoke with a bestial expression on his face. Oh, so you're the warrior who uses priestly skills in battle. I've heard of your deeds. I'm quite surprised that even the Dragon Tusk tribe knows of me. Chasuyu's response felt like two wild animals circling each other. Until your brother agrees to take the position, I am the chief of the Dragon Tusk tribe, Zenbero-gu. Thank you for coming. You certainly seem suited to be the chief of the tribe which values strength. How about a go, then? We need to show each other our strength, right? That's not a bad idea. Zayusu did not feel like stopping them. It was true that once they figured out who was stronger, many things would become much simpler in the future. However, Chasuyu raised his hand before they could get into it, and put out the flames of Zenberu's eagerness for battle. At least, I think it's a good idea, but now doesn't seem like the right time. Why? Chasuyu smiled as Zenberu frowned. The scouts we've sent out ought to be returning soon, so we'll be able to learn about the enemy. It won't be too late to spar after they've given their report, no. There was a small house that was being used as the meeting room for the various chiefs. All the chiefs and Zayusu were here, for a total of 6 people. The name of Zayusu, Bear of Frostpain and Slayer of the former chief of the Razor Edge tribe, was famous among the tribes. In addition, he was the hero who had persuaded the Red Eye and Dragon Tusk tribe to join their alliance, so none of the chiefs here opposed his presence. The 6 of them sat in a circle within the cramped interior. The 3 chiefs had been hard-pressed to hide their surprise when Crush revealed her snow-white skin, but they had calmed down now. After greetings were done with, the first to speak was the chief of the Small Fang tribe. He was small-framed for a lizardman, but he had honed his limbs until they were as hard as steel. He had originally been a hunter, so he was probably the best ranged attacker among all the lizardmen around this lake. In fact, he had eliminated all of his opponents during the chief selection trials with a single well-aimed stone apiece. After mobilizing all the hunters to scout, he now understood the disposition of the enemy. The enemy numbers around 5,000. This figure was far in excess of the lizardmen's troop strength, but it was still within the range they had expected. Someone even sighed in relief as they heard that figure. Then, who's the enemy leader? We're not sure. The scouts spotted huge monsters that looked like giant blobs of red meat, but it was hard to get close to them. How about their makeup? It's an undead army, with skeletons and zombies. Did they use lizardmen corpses? No, the corpses did not come from lizard men. I don't know land-dwelling creatures too well, so I'm not confident in identifying them, but they were probably humanoids of some sort and I didn't see any tails. After hearing about those characteristics, Zayusu was sure that they were from a Plains tribe humans. Can't we take the initiative and launch a preemptive strike? That would be difficult. The enemy is using a clearing in the forest as a staging area, but how long did they take to clear it? I didn't even see the logs which should have been left over. I've gone off topic. In any case, they're in the forest. It's questionable whether we could get into position by ourselves. It would be very difficult if we had to bring the warriors too. Then how about sending the hunters to ambush them? Give us a break, Crush-kun. There's only 25 hunters. How could we defeat 5,000 undead? All we'd accomplish is dying. Then how about mobilizing the priests? Several people nodded at Shasuyu's suggestion, and turned to Crush. However, Zayusu answered the question. I think it would be better if we did not. Why is that? The opposition has honored their agreement so far, but I don't think it'll extend to allowing us to launch a sneak attack. Indeed. Seems like it would be best not to make the first move before all the tribes gather. Then are we going to prepare for a siege? Defending sounds hard. That inarticulate voice came from one of the lizard men, the chief of the razor-tailed tribe. He was dressed in a suit of white armor, which shone with a luster not born of metal. The armor radiated a faint magical aura. It was one of the 4 treasures, the white dragon bone. This armor was made from the cold-infused bones of the frost dragons which led in the Azalesian mountain range. Of course, armor made of mere bones, even the bones of powerful beings like dragons, could not possibly be magical. Yet, somewhere along the line, that suit of armor had taken on magical properties. The problem now was that said properties might have been the result of a curse. That was because the white dragon bone converted intellect into defensive strength. If an intelligent person put it on, it would become harder than steel. It might even be able to rival the strength of mithril, or the legendary metal adamantite. However, the lost intelligence would not return even if the armor was removed. That was why the legends surrounding that item said it was cursed. The armor's wearer had originally inhabited the peak of lizardman intellect, and after he put on that armor, it became tough enough to deflect any and all weapons the lizardmen possessed, even Frostpain of the 4 treasures. Its hardness might well be on the same level as adamantite. Also, while the armor's wearers typically lost their powers of reason and became mentally deficient, he was still capable of thought, which was a testament to his original intellect. As a result, the razor-tailed tribe no longer decided chieftainship succession through combat after he was born. Here is swamp. Poor foundation. Walls. Easily broken. I see. Then, shall we sally forth? Why not? Feels better taking the offensive than to defend. I think each of us has to face 3, no 4 enemies. Easy enough. All we'll have to do is take them down. As they heard Zenbaru's words, the others looked at each other. Eventually, Crush changed the subject. The question now is if the enemy has reinforcements. They might still be marshalling their strength. That's hard to tell. Given the size of that clearing, there shouldn't be any more space to fit more undead. That said, all they'd have to do is position them throughout the forest. The undead did not need to eat, drink, or rest, and they did not need large campsites. Therefore, it was very hard to tell their numbers from the size of their camps. It seems we had best consider a defense scenario for safety's sake. In that case, we of the Red Eye tribe will strengthen our walls to tide us through the siege. I hope everyone else will help us with that. The other chiefs nodded in agreement, even the disappointed-looking Zenbaru. In any case, let's start preparing our defenses. We also need to establish a chain of command. For starters, we'll assign command of the priests to Crush-san. She'll have authority over them in combat as well. Everyone agreed, save one. All the chiefs should form a separate squad of their own. Everyone's eyes went to Zayusu. I see. So that's how it is, little brother. That is, you want us to form an elite unit, then? Correct. The enemy is numerous, and if we don't eliminate their commander, we might well lose this battle. In addition, if they deploy monsters like the ones they sent to each village as messengers, we won't be able to overwhelm them with numbers. We'll need to destroy them using small teams of elite troops. Still, won't leaving our men leaderless result in confusion? Just pick replacement from head warriors. So even if there aren't any commanders, all they have to do is attack the enemy before them with all their might. Huh? What about having the elite squad give orders from behind and only move out when they find the enemy's headquarters or if the situation turns bad? That ought to be pretty good, right? Then, let's form a 6-man squad with everyone here, including Zayusu. No, let's divide it further, into teams of 3. Dividing into 2 teams meant that they could fight in 2 places, but it also meant their strength would be divided and weakened. One team will be a search and destroy unit to deal with the enemy commanders, while the others will be responsible for tying up their garrison troops. In that case, I think having we 3 chiefs form one team ought to work. Zayusu-san can group up with the chiefs he brought along. We'll adapt the team objectives to suit the circumstances. That sounds good. Will that be alright, Zayusu? Yes, I got it. Crush, Zenberu, do you object? I don't mind. Me neither. It's a shame we won't get to show our stuff, but I'll obey the winner. Then, there's still 4 days to the enemy attack. Yes. Then, is there anything which needs to be prepared ahead of time? We need to stockpile stones for throwing and to strengthen our walls. In addition, we need to let the various tribes mingle and establish working relationships so they can function in harmony. We of the Small Fang tribe would like Shasuyu to handle this, as before. We also feel it should be fine. And you too? Crush and Zenbero nodded in agreement. I'll be taking command, then. After this, we'll decide on our tasks for the next 3 days. After the day's work was done, Zayusu walked silently through the bustling village. Several lizard men saw the brand on his chest and frost pain at his waist, and greeted him respectfully. It felt a little troublesome, but he had to respond to them in order to boost morale. Therefore, he put a confident, dignified look on his face, and replied in a bold, fearless voice. In this way, Zayusu reached the location of the walls surrounding the village. Many lizard men were there, all their attention focused on erecting the walls as quickly as possible. First, they used vegetation to serve as the foundation for wooden pillars and to fill the spaces between them. Then, they covered them with somewhat drier mud. The priests would then enchant him, and the walls were complete. There were cracks on the surface of the walls, probably because their water content had completely evaporated. Then, they repeated the same process on the other side. Oh, Zayusu. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, I just wanted to see what you were doing. Zayusu splashed softly over the wet ground as he walked up to Crush, who was still in her plant monster getup. Then, he pointed to the unceasing activity before him. What is that? That's a dirt wall. We don't know what sort of enemies we'll face, so I wanted to make it difficult for them to attack us. Though we haven't even finished half of it yet, since we don't have enough time. I see. Still, isn't it going to break easily, being made of dirt and all? It'll be fine. While a thin layer of dirt is easily broken, that's not the case for a thick wall of dirt. Granted, we haven't been able to gather enough material for it due to the hasty construction, and it'll be weakened if it rains, but it won't fall apart so easily. When he thought about it, just about anything would be difficult to destroy if it was made thick enough. Dozens of lizard men were working as fast as they could before Zayusu as he agreed with that conclusion, but they were proceeding at a turtle's pace. Even if they pushed themselves for 3 days straight, the wall still would not be that long, but it was better than nothing. Currently, we're changing the structure of the fences on the places we can't cover up, so they can't be pulled down. In the direction where Crush was pointing, they had uprooted the wooden pillars and erected them on a triangular clearing. The space between them was laced with loose ropes that had been woven from plant fibers. Zayusu felt that they seemed similar to the fence surrounding the Red Eye village. And what is that? We're going to put heavy objects in those triangular openings to ensure that the fence doesn't fall if it's pushed or pulled. Those ropes are meant to obstruct the enemy's movements. If they're drawn taut, they can be easily cut with swords or other bladed weapons, which is why we've left some slack in them on purpose. Crush eagerly answered Zayusu's question. She had been the recipient of Zayusu's wisdom during their journeys over the past few days, so she was delighted to be able to dole out wisdom for once. In addition, there was another emotion behind that. I see. That way, it can't be easily destroyed. Those words of respectful praise filled Crush with pride. Zayusu nodded vigorously. They were accelerating the plan to convert this village into a fortress as much as they could. While they could not begin to hold a candle to the defenses of humans or dwarves, it was the best they could do on these wetlands where movement was difficult. Come to think of it, Zayusu, did you tell the warriors? Just as Crush said that, the wind carried the clamor of the warriors to them. Their voices were filled with excitement and seemed quite hot-blooded. What's happening? This cheering sounds familiar. That's it. They're cheering for a fight. Could it be that your brother is dueling Zenbero now? Zayusu nodded. Then he realized Crush had revealed her face and seemed quite worried. Your brother's the supreme commander. Won't things be troublesome if he's beaten? I don't know. Still, my brother's strong too. Once he has an opening to use his priest spells, he'll get even stronger. For all I know, I might lose to him as well. Shasuoyu's strength was extraordinary after applying several buff spells to himself. In addition, while he probably would not use offensive spells during a mock battle, if he did, even Zayusu before he had come into possession of Frost Pain would not be a match for him. After all, when Zayusu had defeated the previous owner of Frost Pain, the only reason why said owner had not used its special ability limited to 3 uses a day on Zayusu was because all 3 instances had already been expended on Shasuoyu. That's good. Just as Zayusu thought he should show the worried Crush his brother's fighting form, he recalled the hidden worry he had not brought up until now. He did not know if he should mention it, but in the end he decided to do so. It was somewhat despicable to talk about something he had chosen not to speak of earlier, now that everything was largely settled. However, he could not hold back the pure and intense feelings he had, and he did not want to hide anything from her. There's one thing which worries me. Crush laughed as she heard the unease in Zayusu's voice. She seemed to be making fun of him. The look on her face did not suit the mood in the air or her character, for that matter, and Zayusu was left speechless. Therefore, it was Crush who spoke in his place. It's what you didn't bring up earlier, right? What if the enemy had already seen through our plans and anticipated that we would form an alliance, am I correct? Zayusu was silent because she had hit the nail on the head. In other words, the possibility that the enemy might have given them all this time to prepare, informed them of the attack order, and allowed Zayusu to form his alliance, all for the purpose of gathering the tribes together so they could all be crushed in one fell swoop. Well, you would be worried, given that you're so prone to introspection. Still, no matter what, it would be best to fight the enemy first and worry about things like that later. Even if we win, the enemy probably won't give up. No, in all honesty, there's very little chance the enemy will give up. That may be so, but you were right about what you said that night. And look, there did not seem to be anything in the direction where Crush was pointing. However, Zayusu understood that she was referring to the entire village. Do you see how all the lizardmen tribes are struggling together for the same goal? Indeed, the lizard men were all working towards the same objective. Zayusu recalled the great feast which had been held to celebrate the alliance of the 5 tribes. The people of each tribe had mingled without reserve. Of course, it would be wrong to say that the survivors of the two destroyed tribes bore no grudges, but at the very least, they had managed to swallow their resentment. How ironic, Zayusu muttered to himself. He had always thought they would keep themselves secluded for all time, but he had not expected to see everyone united as one due to an external enemy. We should protect the possibilities that the future holds, Zayusu. The tribes coming together will surely spur us to grow. Zayusu had never seen the techniques of building walls with mud. However, now that all the other tribes knew it too, the lizard men tribes would surely build such walls in future. These sturdy walls would be able to keep out monster incursions. If that happened, the number of attacks on children would drastically decrease, and the lizard men's numbers would increase in turn. And as the number of people went up, they could use Zayusu's fish farms to feed them. Perhaps in the near future, this marsh might become the home of a large, united tribe of lizard men. Let's win this, Zayusu. We can't predict what will happen in the future, and for all we know, all this might be cleared up after we win this battle. If that happens, we'll be able to expand, and that might bring about a world where we won't need to worry about killing each other or food shortages. Crush smiled. Zayusu fought back the surge of emotion within him, because if he let it run wild, the consequences might be irrecoverable. Still, there was one thing he had to say, no matter what. You really are an outstanding female after this battle. Please tell me the answer to the question I asked when we first met. Crush's smile grew even brighter. Yes, Zayusu. I'll tell you after it's all over. Demiurge hummed happily as he worked. He picked up a polished bone and considered where best to put it. Before long, perhaps he had already decided, he shaved off part of its tip and slotted it into the article before him, which he was building. The shaved bone fit snugly into its place, as though it had always belonged there. If building a house without nails was called timber frame construction, then Demiurge's technique could be called bone frame construction. I have a good feeling about this. Demiurge smiled as he ran his fingers over the bones. He sensed that he would produce an outstanding work if he carried on like this. Still, I need a thigh bone from a male of about 120 centimeters in height. He could still complete it without the bone, but the finished product would not look as good. Under normal circumstances, he would let it slide, but this gift was intended for the beloved master to whom he owed his loyalty, so he had to complete it to the best of his ability. If only I could find a suitable bone. In high spirits, Demiurge moved on. The truth was that Demiurge enjoyed making objects like these. It was not a love for bone crafting, but a love for crafting in general. He was very interested in that field, covering items ranging from objet d'art to furniture, and his techniques had surpassed those of a casual dabbler. In fact, his current piece would draw gasps of awe from just about anyone who looked upon it, provided one disregarded the materials from which it was made. This tent contained other items as well, such as a statue of his master made from solidified lava, all sorts of chairs, assorted clamps, and so on. All of them were the handiwork of Demiurge. While those pieces were all built for functionality and were not ornamented, they were still excellent specimens of workmanship. Demiurge picked up a piece of raw material from the corner of the tent and began evaluating it. Just then, he sensed movement from the tent's entrance. He gently put the bone back and squeezed the irreplaceable item which his master had lent him, before focusing his attention on the movement outside. Under normal circumstances, the person outside ought to be one of his vassals or his comrades. Nobody could breach that triple-layered defense without Demiurge's knowledge. Still, it was true that he had to be wary of the enemy who had dominated Shaltia. Several seconds later, someone opened the tent flap. He was dressed in white and wore a black bird-like mask with a long nose. It was Pulcinella. He was a clown who had been created by the Supreme Beings, much as Demiurge had. He had been assigned to assist Demiurge for this operation. After ensuring that he was not under mind control, the tension left Demiurge's eyes. At the same time, he released his grip on the artifact in his hand. Demiurge-sama, the skinning is complete. Demiurge felt a twinge of regret at those words. Originally, Demiurge would have done that work in person to savor it, but the need to be wary of their mysterious and powerful foe meant that he could not leave this place under normal circumstances. Thus, he had handed the task to Pulcinella. Taking care to keep his emotions hidden, Demiurge gave Pulcinella new orders. Well done. Then, begin the next step immediately. It would be rude to directly present something in that state to Ains-sama. As Pulcinella bowed gracefully, Demiurge asked him, "So, how many died?" "None. Thanks to the torturers, they only passed out, so we should be able to skin them soon." While some of them were unwilling to accept healing magic, it was well within acceptable parameters, so it is not a problem. Marvelous. Gathering the raw materials was an arduous task, and they had to perform several skinnings to recoup their investment. Even so, he had not used anesthesia or painless methods to remove the skins. "I want to make everyone happy." This sudden interjection made Demiurge think of Pulcinella's personality. Pulcinella was famous in Nazarick for his kindness and mercy. He had been created to make everyone happy, and so everything he did was intended to fulfill that purpose. Everyone in the great underground tomb of Nazarick is happy to serve Ains-sama. Demiurge nodded in agreement. "I see. Then, a question for you, Pulcinella. Do you mean that others will be happy to serve Nazarick?" "How could that be? That was not my meaning. Serving Ains-sama is truly a blissful thing, one that makes me want to shed tears of joy, but it cannot be counted as true happiness if it is forced." "Oh, then what should be done?" "Simple. Pick one person, and chop his arm off. Then, the others will compare themselves to that person and count themselves fortunate." "How wonderful. And then, to make the person whose arm was chopped off happy, you simply chop off someone else's legs." "Oh, how happy I have made them." Demiurge nodded at the clown, who was laughing to the high heavens. "I see. You do have it there.